Good morning. I'm John Hamilton, the pastor of Christ Church here in Montevideo, Uruguay. And this morning I'm going to be talking about communion. On the very night that Jesus was betrayed, Matthew chapter 26, verse 26 tells us that Jesus took bread and he gave thanks and he broke it and he offered it to his disciples that were eating with him, sharing that meal. He offered it to his disciples and he said, "This is my body broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me." And after they had eaten, he took a cup and he gave thanks and he offered it to them, saying, "Drink from this, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." Now, what did Jesus mean when he said, "my blood of the covenant"? What did his disciples who were with him that night, what did they understand? And why do these words still have significance for us today? Now, these words were spoken at what we call the Last Supper. It was actually a special celebration meal honoring the Jewish Passover. Throughout the week, and especially that night, the disciples who were with Jesus and many other people were recalling the God-sized story of Moses and Pharaoh, the 10 plagues, the escape from Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, and how 1 million or more tribal nomads lost in the desert, wandering in the wastelands, became a nation of united people. In fact, for this particular Passover and what we now remember as the Last Supper, the disciples had climbed up to Jerusalem to commemorate the faithfulness of God in keeping his promises to Abraham, the power of God to break down his enemies and set his people free, the mercy of God to protect and provide for their families as they followed Moses into the unknown, and the graciousness of God in offering his guidance and care for them and their descendants if they would walk in his ways. Exodus tells this story, second book of the Bible. Exodus chapters 1 through 11 tell the story of Moses and how he learned to trust God and how he confronted the Pharaoh of Egypt. Exodus 12 is the story of the great deliverance, now called the Passover, and the departure from Egypt 430 years after Abraham's great-grandson Joseph had first been sold into slavery there by his brothers. Exodus chapter 13 to 18 tells us about the travels, trials, and miracles in the desert, including a major battle against an enemy army. All the way, God shows the people his power, his care for them, and his faithfulness. Exodus chapter 19 begins with an incredible message from God to Moses and to the people as they are gathered together at Mount Sinai. Chapter 19, verse 4, God says, "You have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me fully and keep my covenant," there is that word, "then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." In those days, the people understood what God had done. They recognized that he was offering an opportunity to walk in his ways, to live in a relationship guided by God. They were being offered a chance to live their best life. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 8, the people together as a community said, "Yes, we will do it." The next chapters tell the story in some detail about a 3-day preparation, 3 days for reflection and preparation for the unknown journey of faith that was just beginning. In Exodus chapter 20, we have the giving of the 10 Commandments and what we call the covenant code. Interestingly, a respected Bible scholar, Naum Sarna, wrote, "No punishment is prescribed for breaking the Ten Commandments. The motivation to obey is not fear of punishment, but a desire to conform to the will of God." Exodus chapter 24 describes that liturgy of the third day when all the people gather together. God chooses them to be his covenant people. The people together choose God and commit to walk in his ways. Animals are sacrificed to demonstrate, to illustrate the power of life and death represented in the covenant. The blood of the sacrifice is sprinkled on the people. In Exodus chapter 24, verse 8, Moses took the blood and he sprinkled it on the people, and he said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you." Now, if you are familiar with the gospel story, you must recognize some of the parallels. From Jesus reading Isaiah in the synagogue in his hometown, announcing the coming of the Messiah, sent to set the captives free, to open the eyes of the blind, to set the oppressed free. Then the miracles of God and strong opposition by the ruling leaders. The miracles of God through Moses as he confronted Pharaoh, and the miracles of God through Jesus as he confronted the ruling elite of his day. Jesus gathered his followers. He gave them the Sermon on the Mount. Clearly a parallel to the Ten Commandments and the covenant code in Exodus. And as they gather now on that dark night in Jerusalem, Jesus takes a cup of wine, red like blood, and he says, "This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for you." John the Baptist had told them before he died, "Behold, Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." So much mystery, so much spiritual power. Communion is a moment to gather together as a family, a community, travelers, wanderers, tribal nomads, looking for a new life, a new way forward after a lifetime of slavery. "This is my body," said Jesus, "broken for you. This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many." Communion is community, taking a step of faith together, the strong helping the weak, answering together the invitation from God, updated and graded by Jesus. "Come to me," said Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Amen.